A geopolitical shock just hit North America, and almost nobody saw it coming. Overnight, Canada pivoted, sealing a fighter jet deal with Sweden worth $10 billion, a deal that promises 10,000 new jobs, while quietly inviting China's electric vehicle giants to flood its market. The architect is Mark Carney, former central bank chief, now steering the country toward new alliances and away from Washington's control. Is this Canada's boldest break from US influence yet, or the start of a tectonic realignment? The real consequences are just beginning to unfold. Mark Carney's rise from central banker to political powerhouse was never about playing it safe. As former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, Carney built his reputation on discipline, pragmatism, and a relentless focus on the numbers. Since taking office, he has pushed for something far more ambitious: a national doctrine tying Canada's future to green industry and economic sovereignty. In speech after speech, Carney has hammered home the same message. Canada must own the technologies that will define the next century, from electric vehicles to advanced aerospace. He has called for the country to break free from old dependencies, warning that relying on a single foreign market leaves Canada exposed in a world where alliances can shift overnight. Inside Ottawa, Carney's cabinet has moved quickly. In March 2025, he ordered a sweeping review of all major procurement contracts, demanding that every deal, whether for fighter jets or battery plants, deliver real jobs, technology transfer, and long-term security for Canadians. His government's mantra is simple: no more blank checks to foreign suppliers, no more passive acceptance of US-led supply chains. Instead, Carney has championed sovereignty through green industry, pushing for partnerships with countries that lead in clean tech and defense innovation. Analysts point to back-to-back trade missions, closed-door meetings with Swedish and Chinese officials, and a flurry of policy papers outlining a new era of diversified alliances. Carney's vision is not just about economics. It is about power, leverage, and securing Canada's place in a world where the old rules no longer apply. But as his strategy takes hold, the next moves threaten to upend decades of North American alignment, and not everyone is prepared for the fallout. And that is when things took an unexpected turn. August 19th, 2025. In Stockholm, Canadian and Swedish ministers stepped out from closed-door talks and unveiled a sweeping defense and industrial partnership, one that would ripple across boardrooms and military command centers from Ottawa to Washington. The framework was not just another symbolic agreement. It locked in direct cooperation on defense research, Arctic security, and aerospace manufacturing, with both countries pledging to ramp up investments in the face of mounting global threats. The ink was barely dry when a Swedish business delegation, over 40 companies strong, touched down in Canada. Their mission was to pitch a new era of joint projects, with Saab's Gripen fighter jet at the center. Unlike past procurement deals, the Swedish offer was not about off-the-shelf purchases. Saab's pitch promised final assembly lines in Montreal or Ontario, technology transfer, and a supply chain rooted in Canadian soil. Parliamentary estimates, echoed by union leaders, pointed to as many as 10,000 high-skill jobs if the full package landed. The stakes were spelled out in every meeting: local manufacturing, advanced research and development, and the chance for Canada to become an export hub for next-generation aerospace. Buried in the partnership was a clause that turned heads in defense circles: a formal Arctic security dialogue, with both countries vowing to coordinate on surveillance and deterrence as Russian activity intensifies. For Ottawa, this was more than diversification. It was a declaration of military and industrial sovereignty, breaking with decades of US-dominated procurement. But as the Swedish delegation's Innovation Days wrapped up, a new question loomed: how would Washington respond when Canada's defense future no longer ran through American corridors? Canada's fighter jet program was supposed to be a model of North American cooperation, but by 2024, the numbers told a different story. The original F-35 deal, announced in 2010, promised 65 jets for $9 billion Canadian dollars. A decade and a half later, the projected cost for 88 jets had ballooned to 27.7 billion Canadian dollars, triple the original estimate. That figure, stamped across the Auditor General's report, set off alarms in Ottawa. Procurement officials faced mounting pressure as Parliament demanded answers. Why were costs spiraling? Why did industrial benefits lag behind promises? And why were Canadian firms locked out of core technology contracts? The Carney government's 2025 review landed like a thunderclap. Every line item was scrutinized, from maintenance projections to supply chain guarantees. The F-35's full integration with NORAD and NATO was never in doubt, but critics hammered the program's limited domestic manufacturing and sky-high support costs. Saab's Gripen, by contrast, came with a pledge for final assembly in Canada, direct technology transfer, and a supply chain that could anchor thousands of jobs from Montreal to southern Ontario. Union leaders and provincial premiers rallied behind the idea of a mixed fleet, arguing it was time to break the cycle of blank checks and one-sided deals. As the numbers piled up, the debate shifted from technical specs to economic survival. The question was no longer just about which jet could win a dogfight, it was about which deal would keep Canadian industry alive. And with the F-35's price tag still climbing, the search for alternatives was no longer just political theater. It was a fiscal necessity. But the cost spiral was only the beginning. The next move would force Ottawa to rethink not just its defense contracts, but its entire approach to global trade. The announcement landed with the force of a trade war. In July 2024, Canada imposed a 100% surtax on Chinese electric vehicles. The government cited unfair dumping and a direct threat to domestic manufacturing. The regulation was filed as SOR 2024-187. The move triggered an immediate shock through the auto sector. By the second quarter of 2025, zero-emission vehicle sales in Canada had plummeted 32% year-over-year. Dealerships from Toronto to Vancouver reported unsold EVs piling up. Prices for many Chinese models doubled overnight, and buyers fled to cheaper hybrids. Industry data showed hybrids now outselling full electric cars for the first time, a reversal that rattled environmental groups and automakers alike. But the fallout did not stop at the showroom. Within weeks, China retaliated with a 25% tariff on Canadian canola, slashing exports by 43% and wiping out nearly $1 billion in farm revenue. Saskatchewan, which grows 60% of Canada's canola, saw rural incomes crater. Trade ministry officials scrambled to contain the damage, while pork, beef, and seafood exports faced new barriers. Provincial premiers demanded relief, unions called for permanent protection, and environmental advocates warned that climate targets were slipping out of reach. Meanwhile, Canada's formal notification to the World Trade Organization described the surtax as a temporary safeguard. But with Chinese EVs locked out and canola shipments stranded at port, the economic pain was anything but short-term. Every headline and every market report hammered home the same reality. Trade leverage had become a weapon, and the cost of protectionism was being measured in lost sales, lost jobs, and lost political capital. And that is when Washington's reaction took a turn no one in Ottawa could ignore. Headlines exploded across Washington within hours of Canada's new defense and trade maneuvers. Senate hearings turned combative as lawmakers demanded answers from Pentagon officials about Canada's sudden tilt towards Swedish fighter jets and the possibility of opening its market to Chinese electric vehicles. Senator Grassley warned, if Canada moves ahead with importing Chinese electric vehicles, it hands Beijing a strategic foothold in our backyard. On Fox News, Laura Ingraham accused Ottawa of rolling out the red carpet for Xi Jinping, while a Wall Street Journal op-ed called Carney's vision a betrayal of the North American Trade Compact. The U.S. Trade Representative publicly raised concerns about the downstream impact of divergent tariff policy, and union leaders in Detroit blasted the move as a threat to American jobs. Behind closed doors, Pentagon analysts flagged new risks to NORAD interoperability if Canadian forces began flying jets, not built in the United States or integrating Swedish avionics. Every network from CNN to NBC ran segments warning that North American economic unity was on the line. But the loudest warnings came from those who saw not just lost contracts, but a fracture in the alliance itself. And that is when the expert voices stepped in to dissect what was really at stake. Thomas Christensen at Princeton says a new era of alliance politics is here. Canada's outreach to Sweden and to China is less about breaking ties with the United States and more about hedging against global volatility. Edward Alden at the Council on Foreign Relations warns, diverging trade and defense strategies could fracture the North American bloc, potentially weakening the region's leverage with both Beijing and Brussels. Andrew Yeo at the Brookings Institution calls Canada's cooperation with China on green technology pragmatic, but he flags the risk of entangling critical infrastructure with a state-led competitor. From the defense front, General Stanley McChrystal cautions trust and technical compatibility are the backbone of Western security. Introducing Swedish jets or Chinese supply chains could complicate joint operations and intelligence sharing. Leslie Abrahams at CSYS highlights the upside. Sweden's defense sector brings innovation and industrial depth, but she underscores the need for airtight export controls if sensitive technologies are involved. For all their differences, these voices agree on one thing. Canada's moves are forcing every ally and rival to recalculate the rules of engagement, and the next steps could redraw the map of global power. This is where the story gets even stranger. Today, Canada's pivot signals a world no longer anchored by US priorities. As alliances shift and global trade barriers rise, North America's future grows less predictable and more contested. One thing is clear: Canada's new alliances are reshaping the balance of power. Join the conversation below.